as we all crest that hill,
That pond had a whirlpool.
45 yards out to the edge.
The horned serpent is a big part of some of their mythology.
And I'll be darned if that thing isn't standing right there.
And it would suck children down, and they would never be seen again.
And like stared at me for probably like a full minute, lets out a big old hoot, and then flies off. And I was like, I'm dead.
Yeah.
I will die today.
One more thing on the moon that we can talk charms.
Can you say that again, please?
Welcome back to the Ozark Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Veit, and I am joined, as always, by co-host of the show and my good buddy, Mr. Kyle Plunkett.
Yes, sir.
How are you?
And I'm kind of fired up. We are, I guess by this releasing, we'll have just got back from a big backcountry trip.
That's right.
But we're heading out into the deep woods of the Ozark National Forest to try and kill us up some big bucks.
That's right. We're going to be partaking in that new straight-walled cartridge season.
We are.
Trying to get out there and strike out on public, or hopefully strike one up and bring home pack heavy some big buck meat.
Yeah, we're going kind of old school. Like everything on our back on the way in, everything on our back on the way out.
Yeah.
As far as we can go.
I'm excited. I've not really
Mine
done
too.
a trip like that. And normally you see guys doing that like out in big sky states and
Yeah.
in the West, but just doing a whitetail pack out, pack in kind of hunt here, I feel like it's not as common.
No, it's not.
You don't see it as much.
I just went to Cabela's and bought a bunch of like freeze-dried meals, and my wife was making fun of me. She's like, "You're gonna eat freeze-dried biscuits and gravy?" I was like, "You better freaking believe
better
I
believe it.
am.
I'm gonna love it.
I can't wait. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah,
You guys just need to get a mule.
We really
Yeah.
do. Some pat goats.
we do. Yeah, that'll be fun. As you guys are listening to this episode, tomorrow is Halloween,
Mm-hmm.
which is always a fun excuse for us to just do something different with the podcast. We've been talking a lot about early season whitetail, pre-rut. We're going to be getting into the rut here pretty soon, so we feel like we've been hammering that deer nail. We've put in a lot of episodes on whitetail and trying to give y'all some tips, and us asking questions and trying to get us some tips to get outside and be successful. But with Halloween on us now and tomorrow, we thought it would be a great excuse to dive into the world of Ozark folklore and all things, the tradition of storytelling, where that came from, how it's morphed, why it's important and why it matters as a part of, shaping the culture and shaping this region and the people who live here, and how it persists today. I think it's kind of interesting to look back into your past and then be able to see things, grab onto them, and then see them still existing today in your modern life that is so removed from how the old time Ozarkers would have lived back in the day. And these stories that just now you look at these and we're drawn to them because they're so far out there and wild. But we're going to get into why maybe they're not that wild, and maybe why some of them are actually really pragmatic. Even the magical and mythical ones, like there's meaning behind that, and you can even pull some value from that today and use them today. So to do that, we have brought on two very, very special guests, esteemed colleagues of ours. The first one of those is our good buddy Tad Moore. Tad is a Northwest Arkansas local. We've known Tad for a long time, went to school together, went to church together. And Tad, you've kind of taken your own personal interest in Ozark folklore and reading a lot of the old Vance Randolph books and learning about cryptids and all kinds of stuff. And so, one, we're excited to have you on. What got you interested in some of these old folklore things?
Yeah, no, I was cleaning out my parents' shelves one day as they were moving, and I stumbled upon a Vance Randolph book, Ozark Superstitions, and I think I picked it up at the right time. It looked cool and old, and I was like, I'm gonna read some of these old stories. It's got some ghost stories from some folklore, herbal medicine kind of stuff, witchcraft and the Ozark kind of stuff. But what really sparked my imagination was the stories about just some of the monsters, and I was like, that's super cool. I'm a big book nerd, love Tolkien, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, and so the thought of what kind of folklore, particularly like creatures and like mythical beasts, once roamed the Ozarks, and what are the stories, or are there any? And just kind of started this. Found out there's actually long list.
There's a lot.
Some that are like that might have been real, and others that are like completely ridiculous and almost sound like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. But that kind of just got me down that rabbit hole. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, we're excited to dive into them with you, and Tad's going to kind of serve as a guide into the world of these creatures and cryptids and things like that. So I'm excited to jump into that. And then our other guest, and I am proud to welcome my very own blood, my father, to the podcast. This is his first time coming on the podcast. So my dad is Keith Veit. Dad, it feels weird to even say your first name.
Yeah. It maybe even feels weird to hear it
Yeah.
coming out of you. But I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited about the topic of conversation here today. And interestingly, I can already tell you some of this folklore runs deep in our family.
Mhm.
And I think we were talking earlier that I'm a fifth generation Arkansan, which made my mother a fourth, and my grandparents, which I was very close with, a third, and even some folks that are older than that. So some of these tales that have come right up through the lineage, if you will,
Yeah.
and they're alive today, and in part they're alive in you,
Yeah.
and now you'll be telling your daughter.
I will be telling. Yep, mine. It was funny. I was like, man, I got to get Dad on here because some of the stories that I just grew up hearing from you were, to me, it was just part of our family history and story. And to think now, as after doing a lot of research on this topic, that these were actually bits and pieces of folklore that are above and beyond just our family, and that they're parts of the stories that have shaped the culture of the region and stuff like that. It almost it puts you, it kind of zooms you out into like a broader perspective of, I'm a part of this region, and these stories are as much as they're unique to my family, there's also lots of other families in this region who have these same stories. So it's like these stories I grew up hearing, they are folklore, but they're also just family stories.
Mhm.
So that's we're gonna have you on here to
Yeah.
talk through some of those, and how you talk about how you've continued that tradition of storytelling in our family. So to start, I wanted to just start with, when we talk about folklore and stories, and just the act of storytelling, you have to keep in mind like where these early Ozarkers were coming from and the influences that they had. So the origins of a lot of these stories was, if you think back to the earliest, settlers, not talking about Native Americans, but the earliest European settlers coming to the Ozarks, the earliest group you would have had would have been like the Scots Irish. And, they're coming from, Ireland and Europe, and they've lived their own life of isolation and ruralness and, banshees and fairies and all stories that they would have had in the old world in Europe. And they're bringing a lot of those influences here. You also would have had English and German coming here. And so you've got this mix of cultures, throw in now, slaves and African Americans, throw in Native Americans. You've got this really weird blend of cultures that would have never interacted before. And so they're all pulling from their own histories and their own traditions and weird creatures and things like that is now being morphed and shaped into the landscape in the region that is the Ozarks. And so one of the most interesting things was I was watching one of Dr. Brooks Blevin's clips the other night, and we've all heard of the story, The Three Little Pigs, right? You've got the three little pigs. One builds his house out of straw, the other sticks, and the other stone or bricks, right? Well, there's actually many versions of that same story in different regional pockets. So
No kidding.
the Ozarks has a version of the Three Little Pigs. And it's actually in one of Vance Randolph's books, Who Blowed the Church House Down. And it's morphed and it's unique to the Ozarks.
Huh.
And it's basically, it kind of just highlights the point that these stories a lot of times came from Europe, but then as they moved into America and went into these different pockets,
Got contextualized
it
into
would
that.
have been contextualized into the region. So you may have like a Louisiana swamp Cajun version of Three Little Pigs, right? Where they're eating gumbo instead of running from a wolf or something. But yeah, in the Ozarks version, there's three pigs. One builds his out of chip house. It's a chip house. There's a stick house, and then there's a rock house. And instead of a wolf, it's a fox chasing them.
Okay.
And this was a common story that would have been told. So a lot of the regional stories that are unique to this area happen because of the isolation.
Right.
So you like today we're all so connected, and Disney comes up with a story, and that's the story that everybody gets. And so that's what you know. But back then you wouldn't have had that. Everyone would have been segregated and isolated in their own pockets to have their own stories, and those would have been passed down within their community. And so it's created these little unique facets and stories that arrived and then persisted through generations in oral storytelling. So That's kind of some of the traditions. But then also too, you think about as far as it wasn't just entertainment a lot of the times. A lot of times it was, but a lot of the times too, it was education. It was basically shooting the breeze or even playing tricks on strangers as they come to town, like trying to scare them and rile them up and get them going.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different kinds of stories that we can go
Or
into
parables and raising your kids right.
Yeah,
All that kind of stuff.
Moral lessons, ghost
Mhm.
stories, legends, folk tales, stuff like that, tall tales. And so, anyways, that's kind of some background of origins of some of this stuff, just to contextualize this. But Tad, I'm going to come to you first. What are some of, like, when we think about these different varieties of types of stories? And I know we mentioned creatures and cryptids and stuff like that. What were some of the more common mythical creatures and I guess characters in these stories that you've kind of done some research on?
Yeah, no, I mean, gosh, there's so many that you could go with. I feel like I'll skip some of the ones that people might be more familiar with. Like, I feel like a lot of folks in the Ozarks, even folks that are new here, have heard about like the Ozark Howler, kind of a big
Yeah,
one.
That one's covered very well.
In Arkansas, we were talking earlier, like the Boggy Creek Monster down South Arkansas, but several things like that. But I mean, Randolph talks about several, and he kind of lists, and again, some of them sound just like silly, like the hinge-tailed Bing buffer, and it's like he described it as a large hippo with short legs and a pouch under its chin for storing food, and a flat tapering tail that hinges to the body, and when threatened, it'll grab a stone out of the pouch with its tail and can throw rocks with its tail with accuracy. And like that sounds like just dumb, but hilarious. The Gallywampus, which I think would maybe just be another type of name for the Ozark Howler, or something like that. The Wampus Cat, as some people call it. The Side Hill Hoofer, which is basically like a deer-like creature that lives on hillsides, but the legs on one side of its body are shorter than the other, so it can only walk on a hill, on a steep hillside in one direction. It could never turn around, and so if two meet head to head, they have to battle to the death to see who will be able to get around their path.
Can't go around.
That one is so Ozark and like the
the
hills.
I know.
Like,
Hillside
hey,
hoofer.
one side of the legs are just short. Like
just
that's
like, what if
that's
they
how
just
it
walk in
scales.
circles? And
That's wild.
But two that I think are really interesting. One is the belled buzzard, which the story goes, there are these kids that are messing around, and they'd catch vultures and they'd tie like cowbells to their feet, so they'd fly around, and you could hear the bells up in the trees or flying overhead. But it began to take on a kind of a superstitious nature to it, that if you heard, and probably connected just because vultures already kind of feel like a sense of like death and bad omen.
Yeah.
They're circling overhead, something's about to die. But
Right.
it took on an omen of if you hear the bells on the wind or overhead, trouble's coming, and because the belled buzzard is coming, and that story carries on. Then it kind of becomes less like kids doing this to multiple, and it's like, oh, there's just one. There's one belled buzzard. And it's actually like eternal, like this eternal. It like lives forever. If it flies over and you hear the bells, there's bad luck on its way.
You're not
Some
gonna-
stories that's
You're
like,
next.
huge wings, and you hear like shadow goes over and you hear the bells. I just think that's kind of funny, and it's like something that starts as just a harmless prank, and then again that nature of kind of Ozark storytelling, you turn it into like some sort of superstition.
No, that is interesting. I could see how that would like morph into something that was go from a harmless prank to something that is like Grim Reaper-esque.
Yes, totally, or like
Of,
a
like,
the
I-
Black Cat kind
I
of
heard
style,
the
like bad
bell.
luck thing.
Yeah, and now I may have 3 days to live.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it very long.
The bells. The other one though, and the creature that I think I've gotten the most intrigued by, and looking up different stories, is the Gauro, which is an odd name, and it comes from the sound that this beast would make. But the Gauro,
Can you make the sound?
This is
I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
this is a reptilian
Don't make you do that.
Yes,
type
yeah.
creature. So
And-
I could just see some kind of big lizard making like a growl.
kind
type
of like
noise.
some Gauro something.
Yeah, there
so
you go.
this huge 20-foot longish cave dwelling reptile creature that's got huge horns in its head, huge claws. It can dig through stuff. There's several different accounts of it. Go back even to like 1880. Kind of like the most well documented version of it was the Bear Creek incident. These two explorers are searching searching the caves to mine bat guano, which I guess was like a commodity back then. But they come across this huge beast, and they actually go out and try to hunt it, and they capture it in a pit with like a sheep carcass. But then they come back the next day, the whole trap's destroyed, the carcass gone. There's deep claw marks all over the limestone walls of the cave. And so that spreads out through like the Arkansas Gazette, and people are telling these stories. Years later, out at like a logging camp, there's large noises going on, and this whole family had like vanished off this homestead. And they go out and they look, and they can't find anything nearby except they look, and there's these huge footprints in the ground in a clearing, and trees uprooted and thrown around, animal bones littered all over the place. So that's another one that there's several of these going on, different timber camps, folks just talking about this large monster over like decades long, this giant Gauro type creature. There's some funny accounts with it too, where you mentioned like the stories that go on that people kind of use to fool outsiders. Some guys set up like almost like a circus tent type thing, claiming we caught the Gauro, come see it, and they sell tickets and they sell out this whole tent. And then all of a sudden, this chaos starts going on behind the curtain, and one of them runs out, it's loose, and everybody panics and runs off and flees. And then the guys that set it up get off with everybody's money, and they may never have even had it. And so some stuff like that, but you kind of wonder, was it real, or was it all fake the whole time?
So where do you think some of those stories stem from? You know what I mean? Like for these to be so commonly told across different places, like the name even is documented in different places in different communities across the Ozarks and told. Where do you and I know it's maybe an unanswerable question, but where do you feel like maybe these stories stem from?
Oh, I mean, shoot, that's a great question. I mean, you mentioned the blend of different cultures, and I think that's part of it. I think for a lot of the European settlers that ended up here, I mean, Europe's in so many different cultures, especially England, but like dragon stories are like huge. And so some reptilian beast, I mean, it almost probably even goes back biblical of like the serpent, the evil, like something like dinosauric or serpentine is evil creature that roams in the hills and you need to look out for. And so I think there's bringing like that blend of influence. What intrigues me about the Gauro, it having horns, like as a distinctive feature of this big reptile, like horns on its head or tusks, whatever you want to, however it kind of comes out, is I think it's several Native American cultures, but especially the Osage, who are pretty prominent in this region.
Yeah.
The horned serpent is a big part of some of their mythology.
Oh, really?
And it's it's kind of in some stories that I've read, and I've like kind of just discovered this, so I'm still learning because of that question of like where might this have come from? But kind of this large creature that in some ways represents chaos. Sometimes it brings things together in order. It's just kind of part of the understanding of the world view that they would tell the stories in their cultural narratives. And so I think that's unique though, of like a horned serpent. You get this horned Gauro serpent beast that they're talking about centuries later even.
Yeah, you could see how that would be a really easy tie into like maybe like you're saying English and dragons mixed with Native Americans. It's like put them together.
And in the Ozarks.
In the Ozarks, and now you've got a Gauro.
Yeah, you got a Gauro.
And that's like what people just took with and ran because that was what they were like somewhat familiar with in their history.
And if you think about it, I mean, so much of the Ozarks is there's so many caves in the caves systems that like they're freaky to be in. I remember we've gone out to Devil's Den, and even after they've caged off some of the ones and climbed in holes in the ground that you just stumble upon, and you get down really deep and you're like, we shouldn't even be down here. This is terrifying. And but I mean, you think about that, if it's still out there, something like that. Several years back, I mean, like 2009, they caged up all the caves at Devil's Den because of the mold going in for the bats. But maybe they're not trying to keep people out. Maybe they're trying to keep something in.
Something in.
Yeah, that's
and the Gauro has returned.
The Gauro is back.
They're not trying to protect a species. They're trying to prevent one.
They're protecting this species, us.
Yeah.
I sometimes think that when we were talking about this, I wonder how much of these stories, especially if there's a fear component, how much of these are parental management of children.
You
You don't
go
want
in
your
that cave.
children
Yeah.
playing in caves, right? It doesn't take long to get too deep or too far,
Yeah.
or it collapses,
For sure.
caves in. So, Coal Hill. Coal Hill is, as I understand it, honeycombed with, literally coal mines.
Cold Hill down in Clarksville.
Yeah, down by Clarksville.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't want your kids playing around those because they could cave in.
Right.
And of course, I realize the Osage Indian are far before.
Sure,
But parents are parents, and they're all just trying to manage their kids as best they can. And hey, a little, where's the boogeyman come from?
Yeah.
Everybody,
totally, yeah.
coast to coast, there's a boogeyman. I'm
Right.
pretty sure.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And you look in the literature of this stuff and a lot of the stuff that Vance Randolph has collected, you find everything from, like we were saying earlier, there's moral lessons, there's cautionary tales to encourage good behavior or valiant behavior. There's tall tales, there's folk tales, there's all kinds of different things ranging from like this is told and believed to be true versus this is told I don't believe it, but I want you to believe it, which would be more like a tall tale. I was looking at so Vance Randolph has a book called I think it's called Lies We Always Tell Strangers or something like that. And the introduction of it I thought was worth reading because it really highlights a tall tale that it would have never been believed by a lot of people, but if you get it in the right way and you say it in the right way, and maybe even reading into this book, there are times when, if you were the foreigner or the ferner, as they would say, I would be telling you who's in on this story, and I would let you overhear it, and that would be the most convincing because I'm talking to a guy who's around here, so I'm telling this crazy far off story. It's a tall tale. And you're confirming all of it and blah, blah, blah. And now you overhear it. And you go back to the city and tell everybody, guys, you're not going to believe this. And then that stuff gets perpetuated. But here's this intro that I thought was at least worth a read. Says, backwoods humorists everywhere have a predilection for the tall tale, and the Ozark hillman is no exception. The pioneer hates a liar. In the early days, there was little cash in the country, and there were few written contracts. People depended upon each other, and a man's word had to be good or the neighbors would have nothing to do with him. The hill folk live close to the pioneer tradition, and liar is still a fighting word in the Ozarks. But there's no harm in stretching the blanket, or letting out a whack, or sawing off a whopper, or spinning a windy, when they involve no attempt to injure anybody. A windy ain't a lie, nohow, said one of my neighbors, unless you tell it for the truth. And even if you do tell it for the truth, nobody is deceived except maybe a few tourists. So kind of highlighting of like the a windy ain't a lie no how, or spinning a windy, it isn't a big deal unless you're telling it as the truth. Is like they're willing to do this and lie to entertain or trick someone who's kind of an out of towner that maybe they don't really want to stick around.
Well, as long as neighbor
anyways.
isn't harmed and it's some outsider,
Yeah.
what's the no harm, no foul is that attitude.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
There you
no,
go.
what's the big deal as long as it's a tourist?
As long as it's somebody that we don't really care
That's
about
funny.
or know about.
And that just shows how much they had to depend on each other.
Yeah.
How much they really.
Okay, so I've actually got one. I mean,
A tall tale?
this is
Let's hear it.
to a tourist, okay? And this was, and it's been a while since I told this story, so I'll do my best. So I was working in the emergency department down in Fort Smith about year 2000, and there were these two twin little boys came in, one with a broken arm, and there was a mama and the two twin boys. They were from Detroit, Michigan. So I had a couple Yankees in here, and they had been to a family reunion at Martin Luther King Park in Fort Smith, and it's a couple hundred people, and these are city kids. These aren't Arkansas kids, right? So one had fallen off a monkey bar and broke his forearm, and so I was in putting a splint on him. And I said, well, what happened? And so he tells me, and they were at Martin Luther King Park. And I said, you didn't see any werewolves out there, did you? And he said, the mama said, say what? And I said, y'all didn't see any werewolves out there, did you? And I said, no. I said, never mind. I said, listen, they're not too bad. I mean, they're bad this year. But I said, as long as you stay out from under the trees, you're okay, because that's where they'll be, up in the trees waiting for you to get under them, and then they'll pounce down on you, and they'll tear you to shreds. And so the mama's going, say what? And I said, oh, yes, ma'am.
She said, for real.
Yes, I said, for real. I said, yes, ma'am, for real. And so this goes on, and it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to put on a good splint. And so this goes on, and I get a 4 or 5 times. And I mean, these little guys, they're about 10 years old. Their eyes are big as saucers. And so they've heard this story about the werewolves being so bad this year, almost like mosquitoes, you know. And so John, who is an orderly, John comes in I'm finished up, and I call for John, and John's going to take him out in a wheelchair to the car. And I said, hey, John, how are the werewolves out there on your place this year? And he said, oh, they've never been worse. And he was right there in sync with me. And I mean,
Wasted no time.
when we loaded those Detroit, Michigan people in that car and they left that hospital, they went back and told everybody in Michigan that there are werewolves in Arkansas. And I mean, it was fun.
That's
so
awesome.
it is a
Never been
tall
worse.
tale.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was any harm came of it.
No, that's a perfect example. So for you, as someone who, told the story in that moment, what made you want to tell that, or how did you even come up with that in that moment?
Well, I had 15 to 20 minutes with them, and we had to talk about something, and I don't know why. It just seemed fun to kind of mess with these kids, and I mean, 10 years old is a good age, to get in a good story.
Good werewolf.
Fear
Fear for
werewolf.
life.
I mean, when I was a kid, the monsters, you had Dracula, you had Wolfman, and you had Frankenstein. I always thought, hey, if you get caught by Frankenstein, you deserve it. That guy's so slow. But how you get away from where are you going to get a silver bullet?
Yeah.
For the Wolfman. And Dracula, he can turn into mist and get under the door.
Yeah.
So, unless you got a cross and a clove of garlic, you could be in trouble. So the werewolf, it just kind of worked for me, and I don't know what it was but we had fun, and I think today so what is this, 25 years old? Those kids are 35 years old. They're y'all's age.
Yeah.
You're maybe a little older, and they're probably still telling that story about don't go to Arkansas. They got werewolves. Man.
Real bad this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Worst they've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of that that's like you in that moment you were quick on your feet and thinking that story, but in a way, with you being brought up the way you were and hearing from storytellers your whole life, you almost couldn't help it. Like back to the point of like, if this is just part of the culture, the storytelling is, you couldn't help go ahead and doing that because it was just like, this be fun.
It's second nature.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about storytelling, and there's a lot to learn about it. But I think older generations, years past, my grandparents, great grandparents, they relied on storytelling because there was no internet, there was no radio, there was no telephone. You socialized at church on Sunday. Short of that, you were on the farm, working and doing your chores with your family. And so in some regard, folklore, or these stories are legacy. Our one generation sharing experiences to the next.
Yeah.
A lineage, if you will.
Absolutely.
There's something within storytelling that I always find really fascinating, and I'm interested to know what y'all think about the folklore side of things and where that applies. But stories, especially in the Ozarks, and you mentioned kind of right at the beginning, like as this part of the world was isolated there for a while, the stories got crazier or more practical. But good storytelling teaches you how to navigate the whole world around you.
Yeah.
Like Jesus' most effective sermons are parables, they're stories.
Right.
Some of the best communicators communicate through story.
Sure.
People can learn through like point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but most people want to be carried on through a story.
Right.
You brought from point to, beginning to end through a narration. Like you get the point and you're brought into the story, and you can actually visualize it in your own head of where you fit within that story. And just a real quick practical, I feel like when it comes to just the kind of the outdoor world specifically, I am the deer hunter that I am because of stories I grew up on from my granddad and from my dad.
Right.
So I grew up on stories of a buck grunt from a deer that was 200 yards away, and the deer came bounding up and stared straight at my dad at the 5 feet under the tree on public land, to how my granddad used saddles in the mountains to find deer on their path and all this kind of stuff. So I had this whole catalog of deer stories in my head before even setting foot in the woods, in the deer woods as a little boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I have all these stories running through my head of like what's supposed to happen in the woods and what you do when this this thing does, what you don't do when this thing happens, or all the stuff. And I know there's a billion podcasts on tips and tricks on how to find acorns and kill deer and whatever, but none of that really matters if you also don't have the story to tell at the end of the day. Which is just interesting. Like and that's a simple thing. For us, maybe. For them, it might have been life and death, actually. Like, you carry on the stories of how to hunt deer because you got to eat.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just helps you navigate kind of everything around you.
It does. I think the fact that it came from your grandfather just makes it all the more valuable. I mean, you could get the story from that deer expert from wherever, and that'll be good information to have. But the fact that your grandfather gave you this information, and that's a treasure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a purpose behind these stories is kind of what you're hinting at.
Yep.
And it's evolved over time from just maybe at one point it was just entertainment, or maybe it was never separated. It was entertainment and teaching valuable life skills and survival skills to pass on to the next generation so that they would do the same thing. And it would just keep that clock rolling and keep that family going. And I know for us, Dad, this is kind of where I was going to ask you, as far as like practical reasons for some of these stories, and you mentioned, kind of like rearing children and teaching good behavior. What were some examples that you grew up with from like my great grandma, Tyncy, your grandma, who long time, lifelong Ozarker, lived in Pope County on a farm till she was 93.
Mm-hmm.
What were some stories that you remember growing up hearing that were used with a purpose to kind of teach good behavior or things like that?
Sure. One that I remember fairly early on. I mean, there were a lot of little funny things. I remember I'm 2 years old, and I remember I'm 2 years old because I've seen the photograph. I'm in a cloth diaper, nothing but a cloth diaper, barefoot out in front of the house, and Aunt Janie has me howling at the moon. And there's a blue tick hound next to me, and if I'll howl at the moon, I can have anything I want. It's a full moon, as long as I'll howl out there. And so I'm out there howling at this moon, and it's just like, so I don't know, is that folklore? Is that a tall tale? I don't know what that is, but I certainly did it. Now, from a story that I grew up with, so my grandparents had a small 10-acre place there in Russellville. Our Pope County, Russellville, and next to them was a 20-acre place the Claytons had. And the Claytons had a pond, and that's where we go fishing. But beyond that, going up Skyline Mountain, my grandfather would squirrel hunt about every other day, and so I would trot along behind him. And up on the side of Skyline Mountain was this much bigger pond, and the story was that pond had a whirlpool, and it would suck children down, and they would never be seen again. Now, I have been to that pond numerous times as I got a little older. I never saw any movement of water. Never saw a current.
It's just a farm pond.
It's just a big old farm pond, probably. Now it could have been spring fed, so maybe there could have been some water trickle. I don't know, but I can tell you this: I was scared to death of that pond, and I'm sure that my grandparents told me that so I wouldn't wander up in there and drown, because that's something that happens, to kids in the country. Especially you've had some rains, and we've all been around creeks and rivers that flood and get big quick. And so I think that was one. I don't think there was a whirlpool, but they sure had my attention, and I never went there. I think the first time I went without my grandfather, I was probably 18 years old. I was going to Arkansas Tech. I was a freshman. I think, I'm going to go up there.
You're like, I'm old enough now. I can handle the whirlpool.
I think I can stay out of the whirlpool.
Yeah.
Now that I'm an adult, it can't get me.
Yeah.
Only children.
Strong enough now.
Yeah, I'm smart enough to not get in it.
And that's good.
I think you see some of that stuff too in a lot of different cultures. You hear of like, spirits of the river, the lady of the river who, if you get too close to the river, she'll lure you in. She'll tell you about a scenic place down the river, but if you follow her, you'll never come back. And like stories like this are common.
Ozark Siren.
Yeah, it's common across different cultures, or wandering into the woods and the goblins, they'll lure you in they'll mimic cries of children and laughter, and they'll mimic your parents' voices, and if you follow them, they'll lead you deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods, and then they'll never let you come back. And so it's like teaching these children not to go certain places, stay on trails that don't step too far off the path. Go straight, point A to point B, be careful of what you're doing, and don't fall for anything unless you're guided by, an adult or somebody that or trust well. So Those are common. I know we've got another story that you always told me, and this is more not even really like magical or mythical or anything like that. This is just a story that it at least has been told to me, and I think about I picture this, and it makes me a little bit sharper when I go in the woods, or I'm just a little bit more aware of my environment and how I might handle these types of situations. The story about the wild hogs
Oh yeah.
that you always told me,
Yeah.
like growing up when we were spending time in the woods down in the mulberry and stuff like that.
Right.
It was always like, what would I do in this situation?
Sure.
I got to be careful and watch out for these things.
Yeah.
What was that story?
Well, so this is allegedly a true story in the family, and so again, Tynesian Duval, that would be, and I should mention all the cultures. We failed to mention the French, Louisiana Purchase,
Yeah.
and the French, are trappers up in through here, and your grandmother's maiden name is Duval, or in France it would be Duval, here it'd be Duval.
Duval.
And so, so the story is north of Atkins is where my grandmother and her siblings lived. And like I'd mentioned before, people socialize. They'd go to church on Sunday. When they go to church, oftentimes they would have a dinner or lunch afterwards, and it would be a half-day affair before they went back. So if they were going to make plans to socialize or get together later or otherwise, they would make those plans then. And this story in our family was that there were the brother and sister were going to go from this farmstead to the aunt and uncle, several miles away on Tuesday, and they would leave around 10 o'clock, which meant that it was about a 3-hour walk, and so they should be there by about 1 o'clock. And the story is 1 o'clock comes and they don't show, and 1:30 comes and they don't show. So at that point, a great uncle, he saddles his horse. And he starts riding the trail going toward their farm, their family household. And somewhere between there and there, he finds the boy and girl. They are treed by a pack of wild hogs that are chewing at the base of the tree, trying to gnaw this tree down. And of course, the great-uncle shoots one of the hogs, and they disperse, and the children are rescued. And so that's a true story. And in my family, that's been shared again and again, and so I wouldn't say that's a story that anyone created to create safety.
Right.
I think it's a story that was told because there's potential danger out there,
Right.
and be mindful of that. And I think the other, a practical lesson there is be on time. If you're supposed to be here and that's before cell phones, man. And so when people are thinking you're supposed to show up at 1 o'clock, thank goodness these people were mindful enough to think, it's time to go look for those kids.
Right.
And so they found them. So that's kind of a cool story.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Teach you to, have some woodsmanship, be aware of like what's going on
Sure.
around you.
Those are the stories you think about when you're walking out to the tree stand in the
That's right.
early morning. It's dark, and you're like, God, I hope there's no hogs out here.
Yeah.
I always think of that mountain lion night we saw hiking, and I'm like, it's just in my head every time I'm in the woods at night now.
Tad, that is actually a story that has never been told on this podcast.
Oh,
You want to tell it?
I mean, yeah.
Go for it.
that's a good story.
Y'all were both there?
We have our own mountain lion story in
Yeah.
Arkansas.
We do.
Y'all kick it off. Go
Go-
ahead.
You kick it off.
All right.
I can't believe we haven't told this.
Where
before.
were y'all at?
Where
So we're
yeah.
at the cabin.
Yep, we're out in like Madison County.
Yeah.
Arkansas.
And group of guys. I don't even know why we were out there.
I think we were looking for the mountain lion.
I think we were looking for the mountain. No, because that was a separate one. This time it was just a group of guys. We were out hiking at night because
Back up. Here's how the story starts. My cousin, at the time, we were teaching him how to deer hunt, and there was this one stand that was right next to the cabin. Like you could, if the leaves were off in November, you could see the front porch, but it was just far enough away that you're not going to see it all the time. But
Yeah.
it had been nice. Anyway,
this predates our experience.
this does.
Yes,
But
okay.
this will set up. So he's like 12, and it's like that's a safe spot. If something happens,
Yeah.
we can get there. If it's dark, we'll just come get you,
Yeah.
and we'll bring you back to the cabin. And the woods butt up right to the kind of what we were calling the deer sanctuary at the time, which is this unbelievably messy web of cedars. It's just a thick cedar grove. It's
Mhm.
probably probably a glade.
Probably an old glade
Like,
that's
it's
grown
totally
over
been
with
taken
cedars.
over, and you can't walk through it. If you want to get through it, you got to crawl,
Wow.
and even then you're gonna get lost. Like, it's all it is cedars, and they're touching. And so we've been telling him, I think Ozark in me, right? We're screwing with them.
Well,
like
it
a
is
year-
your obligation.
It is.
Yeah.
The year like leading up to it, we're like, hey, there's mountain lions in these woods.
Yeah.
And of course, my dad and I had been having all these conversations about like, well, Game and Fish won't officially say they're here, but they might be because my dad has a mountain lion story. I've told it before, all this kind of stuff. And we're like, man, there's mountain lions in these woods. So if you hear one screaming, like they dig a hole and they'll yell and it'll throw you off and whatnot, be aware. And it's also, just so you know, it's not a bobcat. So if you see one with a bob tail, it's not a mountain lion. Don't freak out. Those are common. It's not a house cat because a bunch of people, mix those up on a trail camera or whatnot.
Misidentify house cat.
It's a big old 100-something pound tan cat with a long tail. If you see one, you should be scared. Never in our wildest dreams did we think we would actually encounter one. And so we've been telling him these stories for about a year. And he goes out there and he's deer hunting. And I go hunt on the other side of the mountain. And I come back. And my granddad's on the other side of the mountain. And my brother's close. My dad's close. And we all end up back at the cabin. And we're looking around like, man, where is he? Like, he should be here. And by this point, we got out of the stand at dark and made it back.
Yeah.
And it's a hike. And it's a long time.
It's probably 30 minutes, an hour after dark.
Yeah. And so we're like, oh, we'll give him 5 minutes. And if not, we'll go get him. But then we're kind of freaked out. And so I rushed down there thinking there's been a firearm accident or some terrible number of things, right? So I'm walking through the woods. I'm like, where are you? Where are you? And he's yelling back, I'm in here. Well, where's here? I'm in the deer stand. Why are you in the deer stand? It's an hour and a half after dark. Like, dinner's ready. What are we doing? Because I saw the mountain lion. I said, no, you didn't. I said, yeah, I did. I saw the mountain lion. I said, no, you did not. He looks at me and goes, Kyle, I know I'm not that old. I know I'm just your cousin that you like to screw with. I saw the mountain lion, and I'm not getting out of this tree stand unless you climb up here and climb back down with me. I was like, okay. So I climb up there. I was like, tell me what happened. He gave me the whole story. There's this forked horn buck coming out of the thicket. It turns. It freaks out. It takes off. Big old cat, big long tail behind it, chases it down. Rounds into the clearing where he's hunting. Buck goes back into the thick. Cat goes back into the thick, and it's done. It was like 30 minutes before dark, and he was not getting out of the stand.
Yeah.
So
So
that
he was sure of it. He was 100%.
sure. And he, to this day, I mean, he's an adult now. He's like
Yeah.
23,
Yeah.
24. To this day, is like that's a mountain lion.
I'm not
And I
changing
saw
my
it. I'm not
story.
changing my story. I know what I saw, which I appreciate. I believe him.
Yeah.
I know what I saw. So that's why.
So this night,
So to you
I
guys.
think
we're out walking around, but I in my head we were just walking around, and I'm looking. I wanted to kick an armadillo.
Well,
I'm like,
it
we're
was-
out at night, and I'm like, I want to
We've been catching heat for
tonight.
that on the podcast. You're
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
I remember you guys
so,
talking about that. Made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, I remember that too. I remember that.
But we're out hiking, and there's a group of guys because I get up like ahead on the trail, and we're coming up, and there's a pond on the property, and we get there, and I paused at the pond, and I was by myself at this point, and the rest of the group catches up, and I had been hearing some movement on the other side of the pond, and like just some leaves rustling, and it sounded like like an armadillo or
Yeah,
something.
like they do.
They're just
Yeah.
Like
noisy.
they're making tons of noise in the woods. So I'm like,
It's like
Kyle-
11:30 at night. It's dark.
Yeah, it was real dark, and Kyle's up there, and I was like, dude, let's go kick that armadillo. And so we peel off, and we got tactical. So it was me, you, and then Mitchell, and he goes around the left side of the pond. We come around the right. We get there, and like it's dark. I got a dim headlamp, and I you can still just kind of hear some movement, like in it, kind of in that range. We're like, that's like 20 feet from here or something. All of a sudden, Mitchell just screams, and he's like, "Stop! It's a lion!" And we're like, as he said, we finally like
It's
group
a
up, and he's
lion.
like, he said, I ducked down to crawl like underneath something, and my headlamp went up, and I just saw this like tan lion like run through my spotlight. So then we all are
And
freaking out.
Mitchell's one of the toughest dudes on the planet. Like this
Yeah.
dude.
So
doesn't
him
get
saying that,
shaken.
I like took
Yeah.
it seriously, or I was like, or like that thought of like, dude, you're messing
Yeah,
with us.
yeah, or he's messing
And
with
then,
us.
but then like you hear in his voice, like he's actually afraid.
Yeah,
He's like,
serious.
we're going home.
Yeah.
We're done.
So like the whole
Yeah.
group, there's like 5 or 6 of us once we all get together. All I remember is we're like standing back to back, like kind of formation, just like walking out.
shuffle.
And then as we're going up the trail though, we like get up and there's like
3 deer carcasses, like just strewn about, bones everywhere. It's just like a horror movie.
You're in the graveyard.
And we're like,
And this was in the
feeding
cedars.
grounds.
Like, this was the thick stuff.
This was terrifying.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Y'all are in the thick of it.
Well, and the story continues because we saw it one more time before we never saw it again. But you weren't there.
I wasn't there that time.
But you've heard this story.
Yeah.
I'll tell it quick. Is that okay?
yeah, go for it.
So after the second encounter, it's like, well, now we're going to go find this thing, and it's going to be intentional. And so we get a whole bunch of guys together, and it was actually my kind of like discipleship mentor church group, and we were like, we're going out, we're getting the best headlamps we can get. Everybody's carrying a gun. Anyway, one of my buddies with us is a foreigner. He didn't grow up here. He moved here for school, kind of deal. And so we tell him we're going out to find a mountain lion, and I think in his mind he's thinking a house cat, like a little kitty, tiny little house cat. And we're out and we're in kind of the same spot. We found the graveyard, we found the bones, we found all the stuff. We're searching around. We're feeling real cool, thinking that we're gonna find this thing. And we did it for a few hours, middle of the night, and kind of got to us like, we're tired. Let's go home and call it a night. And we're climbing up the hill in between, like in the tall grass, and it was high, probably like neck level. And at the top of the hill, the grass kind of quits because there was another kind of break in the, where the field meets the forest, and there's a little edge there. And we're just talking and chatting, and all our headlamps are on, and we all kind of come over the hill to where you can see further. And as we all crest that hill, headlamps are all looking in the same direction because as guys do, they talk shoulder to shoulder as they're walking, and all those headlamps come over the hill and land 45 yards out to the edge. And I'll be darned if that thing isn't standing right there.
Wow.
And then everybody freezes,
Yeah.
and nobody knows what to do. I don't even think a gun was brought up. I think we just looked at
stared
it.
at it.
He was like, oh shoot.
And it looks at us, and it tears off. And so we tear off after it. Because what else you gonna do?
Of course.
We tear off after it. Well, my foreign buddy, was petrified at this point. He didn't move. He
He's like,
stood in the field.
That's not a tabby cat.
Yeah, he didn't move. And he stood there, and we tear off, and we probably go 100 yards before we're calling his name. We're like, where's he at? So we go back, and we're looking for him. And he's still standing there kind of shaking in his boots. And he goes, man, that thing circled back. It's like, what do you mean? He's like, I saw it come back, and it ran, big circle around me to my right, and it's back that way.
Oh jeez.
I was like, okay, at this point, I think we're done looking for it. We
Yeah.
found it. We came in and did what we
Smart.
needed
We're
to do.
good.
And that's when he said, I thought we were looking for like a little tabby cat. That is not a little tabby cat. That was the scariest thing I've ever seen. And
That is how
we pack it in,
stories
we go
about
home.
the Ozark Howler come about.
Yeah,
There's stories
yeah,
like
right,
that.
yeah.
People
That's
walking
exactly
around
right.
at night
So-
looking
Yeah.
for lions.
those are my
Okay.
mountain lion stories.
So that guy is somewhere else, not in Arkansas, and he is telling that story.
Absolutely.
And it's growing roots in that
Oh, yeah.
culture.
It is. It's got to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, before we move on, you've got one. We've got a Panther story that you were always told that you told to me.
Another Panther story. Here
We've
we
got
go.
we've got one
Yeah.
more Panther story, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. Well, I think this would be brief. This would be, again, Taichi and Duval telling me that. And the story was that, the father has to go into town to get supplies, and it's a wagon and a horse to go into town. It takes about a day to get to town. Then he's got to do business, and then a day to get back. So they're going to be the wife and children are going to be in the cabin for about 2.5 days up there. And of course, as luck would have it, a panther shows up, and the panther's trying to get into the cabin to presumably eat them. And so after a half day, the panther, not being able to get through windows or the door, gets up on the roof. And the concern is the panther's going to come down through the chimney. So they light a fire, and remember, he's got the only gun, and he is going to be gone 2.5 days. And they start to run out of firewood, so they start burning the furniture to keep the panther out of the chimney. And of course, as luck would have it, Dad gets back, and he shoots that panther because the panther's still there. And so that's allegedly a true story, but it's also my understanding that there are similar panther stories coming to eat the baby all across the state of Arkansas.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I was kind of when I heard that from. Again, that was Brooks Blevin's class that he's got that video series on YouTube. he was talking about, a lot of families, if they've been in the Ozarks for a long time, there's a lot of Panther stories. And so there's two conclusions. It's either one that happened all the time, the father's away for a couple days.
Panther comes eat the baby.
And they're coming and clawing at the door, the windows and stuff. Or that probably happened once or twice, and then that story just spread throughout the communities and went out there. And so I hear that, and I'm like, did it really happen? Is that really part of our family's history, or is that just part of the Ozark tradition that we've all been, told? And
So
we've
I was
carried on?
about to say that's crazy because my family has the exact same story.
There you go.
And in my mind, that's our family story.
Yeah.
I'm dead serious.
And so I wonder how many
So we're related.
So we might be.
family.
We must be.
We're kinfolk. So I'm wondering how many people now are listening to this and they're going, I got
the
same
same
story.
story. No, all the way down to like they take the mule with the wagon
Yeah.
and they're going into town,
Right.
and that's insane. Like
Yeah.
I grew up on that story,
Yeah.
and it was my dad's grandfather,
Yeah.
who was old when my dad was born. He's like 70 maybe when my dad
Right.
was born, and he's born in like 1902,
Yeah.
and yeah, like that was his
So-
story.
It's crazy.
That's
though, but
insane.
To me, that it's like, so you can be like, dang, is that really my family? Or to me, it's almost a celebration of like, man, we have so much in common with each other from just we've lived in the same place for the longest times.
Mhm.
And our families probably did cross paths at different times over the years if you were here long enough.
Mhm.
It's like, man, that's a regional thing that we can kind of be like, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
our thing.
It only takes like one generation for somebody's friend telling them that story, and then them telling their grandkid and be like, "Oh no, did that happen to? Was it granddad that
Yeah,
happened
was
to,
that-
or was it just his neighbor that he heard it
Right.
from? No, maybe that was granddad that did it.
Exactly.
And that's how
Yeah.
story evolves and becomes your family story.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I love it, man.
I don't know. I think Keith and I might be kinfolk.
Well, I'm
I
looking
like
at
that-
you. I'm
I like
looking
that
at you a
theory
lot
more.
different now,
Similar,
Kyle.
similar beard
Which-
over here.
yeah.
If I can keep a beard like that at your age, I'll be really
Well, a little
proud.
turn white on you.
Yeah, it looks good.
The other thing I take away from that is if that is such a common story, then that's most certainly validating that there were mountain lions or cougars or panthers. I mean, a lot of those names are interchangeable for a
Sure.
big cat. And, and we've all, even in recent years, you hear these stories. Oh, one was seen up near the Buffalo River.
Mhm.
But then
That was earlier this year.
But then the officials will deny it, right?
Mm.
But boy, it just keeps coming back. So, is the animal out there, or do these stories promote the imagination of our friends that are hiking and camping and hunting?
Sure.
I mean, clearly you saw a big cat
Mhm.
Yep.
with your own eyes, so
Yep.
that's true, and we all that's objective proof, right? But
Yeah.
if this story was so common, we'll say at the turn of the century, maybe it did happen more than a couple times.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
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 No, absolutely. I love it. I think it's so fun that like you can be like, we've got the exact same story in our family,
Mhm.
and people listening are probably saying the same thing as they're listening to this too.
Keith,
So
you bring it up even just like the authorities say, though it's not true. Brings up another element of storytelling and something very, I think, uniquely Ozark is that there's this kind of against the grain nature, I feel like, of the Ozark culture.
Absolutely.
And kind of this entrepreneurial pioneer type nature, and that kind of bucks up against authority.
Yeah.
And I think stories do like they carry a sense of power to it of like, well, that's the story. And like, and if you can tell the story and create a narrative, it becomes almost in some ways like a way of standing up to an authority figure. It can be like an act of rebellion. You just got to get the legend started.
yeah.
And I think that's another thing that just kind of makes storytelling so integral to this culture in the
Yeah.
Ozarks.
Yeah.
It
If
does.
you want a good
You're
story
right.
to stick around here, you have to say, yeah, I mean, the authorities deny it. But
I know, and
it's like, oh, that
when
story's
somebody has
sticking.
that little stick on a story, it's
Yeah.
so
Oh,
good.
now it's true. That's a good point, Tad. That is a good point.
It's a little conspiracy here.
A little
yeah,
bit.
just
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm just sad I haven't seen any evidence of that cat now for like, I don't know,
It's
12
moved
years
on,
or
dude.
something.
Well,
moved
and to be
on.
fair to, I guess, the officials, they say there's no breeding population.
Right,
So they have
it's-
confirmed that
yeah.
there are
That's true.
cougars and mountain lions, but there's no breeding population, so they say. But I mean, you never know.
Well, that they know of.
That
There's
we-
a
yeah.
lot of dark country out there.
That's true.
It's true.
All right, we're gonna transition. There was another topic that I wanted to hit on, and that's just kind of the general superstitious nature of Ozarkers.
Yeah.
You think about, again, this was a people group that was isolated, and so these traditions and customs, you kind of, in a way, if you think back in those times, there was a lot of life that they just had very little control over. As far as weather, they're so dependent on their crops, and if there was a bad drought or something like that, it could devastate a farm that's maybe been there for 15, 20, 30 years, where they'd have to pack up and go because there's not rain in this land, there's no fertile soil, we got to move on. And so, death, disease, visitors coming in, fortunes coming up and down, like there was just a lot that they couldn't control. And so in a way, I think a lot of this superstitious nature came from a place of like wanting to have some kind of control over these, uncontrollable experiences that they had. And so there were these little routines that were built into it. And so, Kyle, I know you did a little bit of research on some superstitious things that Ozarkers would have done. So I'll kick it over to you for what you brought.
Yeah, I didn't bring much.
Okay.
So we can do that, and then we can see if there's any more cryptid or Bigfoot stuff we want to cover. But
Sure.
I kind of brought two to the table, and I'm interested to see who else has family stories of these or just heard of these. But the first one is the moon. So just the moon is powerful. Is kind of an idea that's generationally prevalent around here. Of you hunt by the moon, or you plant by the moon, or you
Harvest
by the
Yeah.
moon, and all of that. And I know the moon, the sun, and the moon. I mean, for like all of human history, there are going to be cultures that like worship them and all of this kind of stuff. But
yeah.
so this isn't a new idea. But the moon, like following it is unique in the Ozarks and other kind of hill countries for really two reasons. One, and I'm reading some notes, so sorry, YouTube. Planting by the moon wasn't just a superstition. It was kind of a way of ensuring their livelihood. According to the Ozark tradition, if you plant above ground crops, things like corn or beans or tomatoes or I guess like kind of the three sisters, what would that be? Corn, beans.
No,
There's another one.
Farmer guy.
A ground cover, a squash.
Oh, okay.
That would be a traditional way of planting. So the beans can go up on the corn, and then the squash is a cover ground crop.
Oh, I see what you
so the deer don't eat it.
Yeah.
If you plant above ground those things during the waxing moon, the time between the new moon and the full moon, it draws water energy upward, and it helps the plants grow. So something about the moon getting fuller, in their mind, brings water up from the springs and the ground and the dirt to make your plants grow better. Conversely, root crops, so your potatoes, your carrots, your whatever else, you shouldn't do that. You go the opposite way.
Waning moon.
Yeah, you should go on the waning moon, because when the moon begins to diminish, the idea was the energy would be pulled down into the soil, helping the root vegetables grow larger and sturdier. So like you're using gravity a little bit for the moon's gravitational pull.
Well, moon affects the tides and the water.
Totally,
and stuff, right?
it's like to your benefit. Let it pull those roots down.
Yeah.
and grow deeper. But then this one's cool too. The moon's influence we know wasn't just for planting. Ozark hunters and other hunters, but we're talking Ozarks. Were guided by the lunar phases, and it's common knowledge among old timers that the full moon brought out animals to feed. Now you'll see this even like now. People follow the moon calendar, and it's like big moon, so you better get a late start on your morning hunt because they're going to be feeding all night long. Which some of that is probably pretty true. Like a deer is going to see better and it's going to eat, or bear is going to see better, it's going to eat.
Some people still swear by that and like
They do.
actively hunt based on the moon phase.
I've done it. I grew up doing it.
Mhm.
Like that was my granddad's thing, and it worked.
Yeah.
It'd be like, all right, full moon, so it's probably better to be in the stand from 10 to 2. Now we'd go out early anyway, but your better bets later.
Yeah.
And it's like something to it.
Yeah.
Or not. Could have just been we were in the right spot for where the deer was going through, right?
Could have
like,
been just that day. Yeah.
you never know. It's
I don't know.
kind of
You know,
self-selecting
you know
bias.
me. I'm a very novice hunter. I always check that thing.
Here we go.
I check the thing every time, and my mom is like,
You're true Ozark
now that I'm
attack.
saying, I'm like, this, I'm so much like my mom. My mom tracks the full moon. Like anytime it's a full moon, she expects something crazy to happen. She's like, oh, it's full moon tonight.
Full
People
moon.
are gonna be crazy
Be
tonight.
careful.
Be careful out there.
I know
Always.
Keith has stories.
Always.
Do
So-
what?
I said I know you have stories. ER.
Yeah, well, the
You're a
emergency
doc-
department,
Yep.
the full
Oh,
moon,
it's full moon.
that's always Crazyville. But from a practical sense, both planting and harvesting during the full moon is frankly just illumination. You can see what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Mhm.
Yep.
So that makes sense.
Some of that he was talking about the water and waxing and waning. It made me think about was it your mom Betty who was talking about if you'd see the moon and it was a crescent moon that looked like a bowl,
Right.
that would mean it's going to rain soon
Yeah.
because that bowl's holding water and it's going
Exactly.
to tip out soon.
Yeah.
Right. So if that a crescent moon is laying flat like a bowl, and it's filling with water. So we'll have rain within a week when that bowl tips and
Yeah.
spill out.
Yeah.
We need that.
And I have to tell you,
We do need
boys,
that.
I have to tell you, I have seen that happen again and again in my lifetime.
Yeah.
You all pay attention. You see if it doesn't happen.
Pay attention.
I'm gonna watch.
It's
Well, that's how I think they're not as distracted. They notice those patterns.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that's how that sticks.
Yeah.
Yeah. One more thing on the moon that we can talk charms, but talking about
Can you say that again, please?
No
I don't know,
context.
man.
No
We're gonna catch
context.
you moon bathing after
actually
this.
put that out. You said 2 more superstitions.
Yeah, yeah.
I have one on charms.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know.
I already get caught up in some voodoo.
hilarious.
I don't want to do
about?
this.
Well, it'll be quick. That was good. The hunters would wait for the hunter's moon. Who knows what a hunter's moon is?
I don't know
I
if
don't
that
know.
is.
You don't know?
Is that the orange red moon?
Nope. Hunter's moon is the first full moon in October,
Oh, okay.
which would be said to provide an ideal condition for a successful hunt. In fact, we were having people tag us on Instagram, like hashtag Hunter's Moon, this last week or week and a half.
It was
Because
a big
it was,
moon,
weeks
big
ago.
full moon
That
last
would,
week.
yeah, that's what it was. So
Yeah.
if
I
people
remember
getting
that
out,
moon,
like
yeah.
getting in the woods, going, it's the hunter's moon. Like
Yeah.
it's the first full moon in October. It's time to go. Hunt's fixing to
I
get
like
good.
that. That's cool.
So do you follow the moon because if you're an Ozarker, because it's better to plant and better to hunt because it's just more illumination, or is there something to? I tend to get more deer around this time. Could also be the rut phase because it'd be whatever. But if you've got a plant to eat or hunt to eat, and you're kind of taking in everything around you, it makes sense you would consider the moon and
Absolutely.
the bowl tipping out the water,
Yeah.
whatever else.
Yeah.
So yeah, the
I mean,
moon.
those people, old timers, they were so much closer and more connected to the land and nature and things that were going on around them. Like you're saying, they're less distracted. They're not staring
Sure.
at their phones
Mm-hmm.
all day on computers. Their way of life was dependent on the native and the natural features around them, what they could plant, grow, and hunt. And so, for them to be putting all of these pieces together, in their own brain and making sense of them however they can, it actually makes a lot of sense. And they're just trying to make the most practical, reasoning and logic behind what's happening in their lives. And a lot of it, I mean, there's some of it that's probably like, they're probably got 90% of it right or pretty
Yeah.
close. And, we've since maybe explained it with more modern science and things like that. But I don't know, for them to get so close and to have carved out a life for them in a place that's pretty uninhabitable, if you think about just the rocky soils and the hills and the tough places to live, you had to be pretty tough to make it here.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
You go up to that Ozark Cafe up in Jasper, you see those black and white pictures on the walls. Of these are people who were pioneers,
Mhm.
and they're up there. So it's a forest, right? These guys are up there with an ox, pulling out tree stumps with an ox, and it's it's daylight, and you finish working in the dark. It's time to get rest, right? But when the sun comes up, you're back to work. That's what you do.
That was your
And if
8
you're
to
going to
5.
clear 40 acres of forest with an ox, I mean, that is work that we can't comprehend.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
That's the next level of manual labor.
Yeah.
All right, Charmer over there. What do you got?
Yeah,
Charms?
give us your charm.
Just 2 things.
Okay.
You asked me to do research, bro. I did research.
No, I
Love
it.
Okay, 1 charm and then 1 nut. How's that?
are you the nut?
Maybe so. I'm starting to feel like one after a whole
Who's the
conversation
charmer
about
moons.
about moons and cryptids and mountain lions and whatever else.
Somebody's going to have to walk me to my truck.
I know it's dark outside.
There's a mountain lion out there.
Yeah.
Okay,
What's the moon doing right now?
who has heard of the hagstone?
I don't know.
I've heard that, but I don't know what that is.
We got a hand raise from
You
Daniel,
have?
the producer.
Daniel, what's
Off
the
mic.
hagstone? Oh, you read it in the book. Okay.
I don't
You've
know what
heard
it
it.
is. I've just heard the term.
Okay, so the hagstone is kind of a protection charm. Okay, it's charms and all that stuff. Like Ozarkers were superstitious.
What is a charm?
A charm would be like a token, like a rabbit's foot,
Like
okay.
a
Good luck.
Good luck
good
charm.
luck, or like
Yeah.
a 4-leaf clover,
Okay.
Yeah.
or like the Deep South would paint their porches ceilings blue, haint blue,
Hmm.
because haint blue wards off
Haints.
haints.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a hagstone, and a hagstone is a rock with a naturally occurring hole in the middle. So if y'all have ever walked all these Ozark creeks, you're
I've
going to
seen
see
those.
these
Oh,
all
it-
over.
Oh,
I,
yeah.
kids always call those friendship rocks growing
Yeah,
up.
you
right?
make a
say
little
like that,
necklace
it's like
and
you
whatever.
put it on a thing like that, but it's like a what's
Yep.
it called? Hagstone.
Hagstone. So you grew up with a friendship rock where you would tie a rope through
throw
it.
a rope through
or
it, make a bracelet out of it. Yeah.
Exactly. What you're actually doing was rooted back into old Ozark history of wearing the hagstone
Okay.
to ward off evil spirits
Wow.
or keep them at bay.
Nothing wards off
They
evil
would
spirits
they'd
like
put
friendship.
them over their doors, or they'd wear them with strings around their necks, believing that hole in the rock could trap or confuse bad spirits,
spirit.
bad
Wow.
spiritual things out in the woods or in the world. And so some even thought that by looking through the hole of a hagstone, it would reveal hidden or supernatural realities.
Oh.
Dude, I am gonna
Which
get
is
one.
just
of those.
I like that.
I'm getting one tomorrow.
You're gonna look through it.
I'm gonna find one. I don't know where you get one.
Just
you
go,
have to,
I just go
you
to
have
the
to
creek.
find it in the woods,
You go to the
or
creek.
can you just go buy one?
You probably have to find it
No,
yourself.
I think you got to find it.
That makes
Yeah, I
sense.
think,
yeah.
you know,
can't
it's
buy
like
that.
You
you're a
gotta earn
hagstone.
it. You gotta
yeah,
earn
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you go buy an arrowhead, it's
Yeah.
like that's cool, but
Yeah.
you kind of want to find one.
Right.
So yeah, I think you go find your hagstone,
Okay.
and then you either could decide to hang it over your door or wear it around your neck.
Oh, I'm gonna get a piece of leather. I'm gonna hang it right
There we go.
There you go.
See, I just thought that was interesting,
like
and
it.
it's kind of a fun like. Did people really believe that, or was it just it's fun and it's a pretty rock that they
Yeah.
found by the river and might as well put a string
Well, it's
around
funny,
it,
like,
and
there's
then
things
you're
that-
telling your
Do you tell? Is it like I don't know, like stories like we kind of keep going, like you use them to educate people, you use them to entertain
Mhm.
folks, and sometimes you just use them to egg people on. But
Totally.
like,
Yeah.
I even like told my kids recently we were out skipping rocks at the creek, and I was like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, you got to find the magic rocks, and you know they're magic if they bounce on top of the water. But then the problem is they're out there in the creek now, and it's just like I just said that off the cuff because I
Yeah.
thought it was funny, but now he thinks that Dad's really good at finding magic
There's
rocks.
magic rocks.
Yeah.
And I have to find
It's
them.
just, is it something like that where it just started as like telling your kid something
totally,
dumb?
and then spread.
It
That's
is,
funny.
Yeah. Kyle, I'm curious. Did you come across the Buckeye in your research at all?
Yeah, that was the
That's the nut.
That was the one.
Okay.
So you go ahead and
Well, I wasn't gonna say. I was gonna ask you to tell the story because I was thinking back. Even if you guys remember the episode we did on the buffalo when we interviewed Misty Langdon, we walked into her house and she handed us three things. She handed us some beeswax chapstick that she made from her own beeswax. She handed us some homemade muscadine jelly, and then she handed us both 2 Buckeyes. And Dan was there, so 3 Buckeyes. And I've still got mine, but she's like, just my grandfather always carried one on him as good luck, and so I've got a couple here, and I want you guys to have these. And it was the most genuine
That's
thing.
awesome.
But it's something now I'm like, I keep it with me, and it's something. It's kind of a comfort thing. I'll keep it in my pocket and rub it in my pocket. But it's a good luck charm. So I'm curious what I don't know the background on that at all.
yeah, I'll give the high level. I remember my grandmother had one, and would keep it in I think like the china cabinet, and it's just a pass down I think from her mom.
Yeah.
Dude,
That
you
is
won't
a
believe
good luck
this.
thing.
2 weeks ago, I go up to a Nebraska football game, and your Uncle Steve
Yeah.
gives me 2 Buckeyes to bring back here to give one for your daughter and one for your brother's daughter.
No way.
And they're in my kitchen right now.
As like a good luck.
Yeah.
Kind of.
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that
I think
crazy?
I've got one at home in a chest that I got when
Yeah.
went riding horses. My grandpa's a kid. He found him and gave him to us. So
Yeah.
yeah, like the buck. I know that's like a thing, but what?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the background?
What's the background?
I mean, I think y'all are kind of hitting on it a little bit. A lot of it is I care about you, and here's this thing to tell you that I care about you.
Yeah.
So like keep
Keep
this little
you
piece
safe
of
or
me
keep-
with me,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you're good. But yeah, it's really it's a good luck charm is all it boils
Okay.
down to. So the notes I have on it is if you carry the Buckeye seed in your pocket, it was kind of a surefire way to have good luck.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Just as simple as that. Like this is a good luck charm.
it
Wonder
was
why
a
the
practice
Buckeye.
that stemmed from a
Like, why
belief
not an
that
acorn?
that a seed. Well, this is kind of cool. It was a practice that came from a belief that a seed carried like the spirit of the tree.
Huh.
And so something about its smooth, pretty
Yeah.
appearance makes it symbolizes watchfulness. It looks like an eye,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
buck
yeah, yeah.
eye. So
Yeah.
because it kind of looks like
That's
an eye, the spirit of that tree is like looking out for you. That kind of deal. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
that is the Buckeye.
Gotcha. Yeah,
and then
that's
there's
cool.
it goes as far as that all the way to like, well, if you rub it in your hands, it cures arthritis and all of that. It's like you can also say that about the chinkapin. I mean, he's like, if you
Chinkapin
drink the
nut.
tea of the chinkapin leaves, like it's going to do it. And he
Yeah.
was even saying, remind me his name. He's the
AJ Hendershot.
Yes, AJ. Is like there's actually some medicinal properties that are legit.
Yeah.
And it was folklore, kind of weird, backwoodsy, whatever, for a long time. And now they're learning scientifically some of this stuff is legit.
Mhm.
Now, is it going to cure your arthritis? Probably not. Could it help your whooping cough? If that's what you have, it actually might. So I don't know. There's something to the Buckeye,
There's something to it.
but that one's deep. That one's deep rooted. So we had to touch on it for at
I
least
like
a
it.
minute.
I've got a superstitious Arkansas Ozark thing.
Which one? What is it? Give me a hint. If you can.
The woman kills a snake with a hoe
Okay.
while she's
yeah,
pregnant.
yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, so my grandmother, again, Pope County, she says to me, she says, if a woman who is pregnant kills a snake, cuts a snake's head off with a hoe, her child will be born missing a limb.
Whoa.
Whoa. That's big. That's pretty hardcore. And I'm sitting there going, I don't think that's real.
Kill the
Grandma.
snake.
I don't think that's legit. I got another one for you. Same deal. Kyle's older brother, Connor, he's a baby, and I've got him, and I'm swinging him, and playing with him, and I've got him by the ankles and just kind of swinging him like this. And my grandmother says, "Oh, son, be careful, you'll flip his liver." And I said,
Like a horse.
"What?" I said, "You can't flip a liver."
Yeah, you're in healthcare.
So I mean, she was just scared to death I was going to flip his liver, and that would probably kill him. I don't know.
Like, like the people being convinced if you pick up a toad, you'll get warts.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
grandparents were like, put that down, you're going to get warts. I'm like,
I picked up
not,
thousands
man.
of
I've
toads.
got a lot of toads.
Never had a wart.
Yeah. And a cardinal coming to your window is a family member who's died coming to visit.
Yeah.
Was
Coming to
something
watch you.
that we
Cardinal.
grew up with. Yeah.
There's some more too on owls. Owls were like
Owls,
a
yeah.
bad omen. If you heard a hoot owl close to your house, it meant someone was going to die or something bad was going to happen in a couple of days. Like back, kind of like the belled buzzard. Is
Yeah,
like
it's like the birds. I remember that because last time I was hunting last season, I sat down in the stand and like a barn owl flew down. It was really cool, but it landed on a branch like right in front of me and just I'm like tucked in, just looking out like a slit in my camo, and it knows I'm there. It's just direct eye contact.
oh yeah.
And like stared at me for probably like a full minute, lets out a big old hoot, and then flies off. And I
Yeah.
was like, I'm dead.
Yeah.
I will die today.
Not good.
Like,
Not good.
I guess.
This is
I'm going
bad.
to fall out of this stand.
Yeah.
This is bad.
Tad, I didn't take you for the actually superstitious type. This is
I kind of
awesome.
am.
That's
It's in my head.
hilarious.
That's funny, man. That's good stuff.
Oh man, so lots of superstitions out there, and we haven't even scratched the surface on that. There's a whole Vance Randolph's
Yeah.
book, Ozark Superstitions. There's so many like agriculture or household superstitions, women and children, like just all weather, all kinds of things in there that I don't even know how these people would have kept track of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Of like, if you drop the rag on the ground and it lands this way, it means a visitor's coming. It's a man. If it lands in a wad, or if it lands spread out, it's a woman. And then if you drop it twice, they're going to be really hungry when they come. This visitor, so you better have a meal ready. It's like there's so many different things that I don't know how they came up with them or how they kept track of them, but there's a lot there.
I think they kept track of them because they told them again
Sure.
and again and
Yeah.
again.
Probably so.
You know?
Yeah.
What else is there to
you
talk
read the
about?
part about the water
Say-
witches?
So
Did it? No, I haven't.
So,
But the like finding a well with the Y stick.
Yeah.
I still see people doing that.
And it's I guess proven.
yeah.
But it also kind of sounds like in a really rocky terrain that's hard to find wells. If you could tell people like, yeah, I'm like really good at finding them.
Yeah.
And I've got my method, and it sounds like
Yeah.
a really good salesman be like, yeah, like I know magic.
Yeah.
I can find the well.
Yeah, you're like, how did you do that? No, that would make you
Is
a
it
very
proven?
valuable person.
I mean, some people are really
See,
good at
people
doing
swear
it,
by
and
it.
they
They're
can tell like,
Allegedly, some
water
folks that
witching.
can do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You know.
something about just sensing a different tension in the something as you're holding the forked stick
Dude,
over
that's wild.
the ground.
Mm.
All right.
Probably works on it when there's a full moon.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, energy
And
being
if you got a
drawn up,
buckeye in
right?
your pocket.
Water,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can feel the water.
You got a
It's
buckeye in
pulling.
your pocket, a hagstone around your neck, and it's a full moon.
All right, I'm gonna transition to our closing segment here as we kind of wrap things up. So we've talked about a lot of where this stuff has come from, some of the stories. I want to ask all of you guys, how do you feel like these stories and storytelling from the Ozarks has kind of adapted to modern day times today, if it has at all? I mean, we've talked about some stories that we've heard, but do you feel like it's adapted to the point where it's still important, it's still very much a part of our culture? Or do you feel like it's more fading out as we kind of go on and we become more homogenized and connected across the country?
Well, my first thought is, I think these stories make us rich, and they are perhaps more diluted simply because there are more people from other parts of the country that have moved here, and so they may not, they maybe heard the boogeyman story because we think that's coast to coast, but they maybe haven't heard some of the local Ozark story, and so that's become more diluted. But it's quantity versus quality, and quality is the richness of these stories in our culture. And I mean, we're sitting here today, and I I know that of at least 5 generations in my family have told these same stories,
Mhm.
and you will soon be telling them to your daughter.
Mhm.
And so I think it's pretty wonderful.
So you think it has continued on? It is still part of our culture.
I think
It's
it's part of our
adapted.
culture. I don't know how relevant it is to when you're going down I-49 necessarily, but our culture is not about I-49. Our culture is about being out here in the Ozarks
Mhm.
and in the countryside. And when you're out there in the countryside, just like your grandfather taught you through those stories, that becomes practical. That becomes relevant.
Mm-hmm.
What about
Mm.
y'all? How do y'all feel like
Yeah.
storytelling's adapted?
Maybe for the culture at large, I think we've kind of lost the art of storytelling.
Mhm.
And so, I don't run into a lot of people today who are going to tell me some amazing, fantastical story. If anything else, it's just going to be, just kind of normal daily life. And maybe we've kind of lost the magic of the unknown and all of this, where it's like I go to work and I'm on my social media and I do my thing and I answer my email and I go to bed. It's like kind of a sad way to live. It's like that's the only way we think. But so culture at large, I would say yes, largely it is lost. And Kyle, we've talked about this before. Even just like I want to bring like deer camp back, like the deer camp spirit back, and all this kind of
Yeah.
The
stuff.
stories
but
that were told there.
all of that. But culture within families, and family meaning maybe blood biology family, and then families of kind of common people, kind of the common Ozarker tribe who likes to do the things that they've always liked to do for generations. I don't think it's lost on them at all.
Yeah.
I actually think being given a Buckeye by Misty when we show up to interview her, about like the deep history she has with her family and place and connection to the buffalo,
Yeah.
and be given this kind of token of honor and like watchfulness and care, and like, hey, this is for you, and you take it with you. For her, it means something, and for us, it meant something because I'm giving you a piece of me. I'm giving you a piece of something that I care about,
Mhm.
and I want you to take it with you and
Yeah.
remember.
I'm sharing the story with you
And
too
I'm
about
sharing
my
the story.
grandfather.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, I think within the families, it will never truly die. I think there's a way that our stories get further and further removed from reality.
Mhm.
Not to get too like fatalist or like freaky. But I'm pretty conscious of the stories that I tell my kids because I want them to grow up with a similar like appetite for them, but I also want them to know where they came from and who their family is and what we believe and what we value and what we care about. And we've talked a lot of scary stories. I try to tell my kids a lot of really hopeful stories of things in the woods because I'm trying to raise kids that are conscious, thoughtful, like well-rounded humans. And so my daughter is actually, she knows I bear hunt and deer hunts. And she's like kind of scared of the woods, so she's like doesn't want to be around them.
Yeah.
So I'm trying really hard, and she's small right now, but to tell her the positive stories of why being outside in the woods is really good for you,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and like the joy and the beauty you can find in it, and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying culture at large, kind of in our neck of the woods in the Ozarks, it's probably going away a little bit. But family to family, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who's been here, they're maybe even second generation, who does not have a whole list of stories that we just told.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's part of my family heritage.
Yeah, for sure. Tad, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think in a way you can be pessimistic about it and think of, man, we're so far removed from it, and as even in our unique corner of Arkansas and small segment of the Ozark region that's getting so many folks, an influx of people from different places moving here, there's a fear of those stories are going to overshadow and they're going to change them. And I think there's something to that, and like folks that do have longer generational ties to the area need to speak their stories and educate people that are moving here of them to help them appreciate where they've come to. And yet, in the same way that our ancestors that moved here probably adapted stories from indigenous folks that were here before, other settlers and other places, it's kind of the same thing happening. Of those stories are going to pick up new elements, they're going to lose some of them, they're going to take on new flavors. But if I could give a metaphor of it, and I mentioned like skipping rocks earlier, I love skipping rocks, and if you just think about the process of that, of when you stoop down in a riverbed out on the White River, that perfectly shaped little disc of stone has gone through decades, centuries, millennia of erosion, and to take on that unique shape, for you to like pick it up, zip it out across the water, and have that little unique moment of joy of, oh man, that went forever, that was cool. And if you think about it, I think stories are really similar to that. Of they come out of this large chunk of a mountain, and over time, as they go down the riverbed, they're going to lose elements of themselves. They're going to take on shapes. They might pick up different sediments. I'm not a geologist, but eventually that thing is going to be a piece of sand on a beach somewhere.
Yeah.
As it gets through the whole water. And yet, if that story can get picked up, and it all just takes one person to stoop down, pick it up, zip it over the water for a little moment of joy, that to me is like the power of storytelling. And yet recognizing they're going to all be forgotten.
Yeah.
And they're going to change.
Yeah.
But within our lifetime, if we can keep some of them alive and give our kids the joy of those little stories, that's what it's worth.
Yeah, for sure. It's a to further your point. It's a process. It's ever changing. Stories will always change. And you even think about the cultures that are moving here, and like Springdale is Springdale, Arkansas has a huge Marshallese population. There's a lot of Hispanic population that lives in Northwest Arkansas and in different places in the Ozarks. Like, how will those stories morph into the changing narrative and culture that we have here? And yeah, it will never be the same as it was. And so to try to only hold on to the past of a point in time, like these, the 1800s Ozarks that we talk about a lot, would be a mistake, because there's good with change too, and there's the world is always changing, culture is always changing, so it will always be a continuous evolving story that never looks the same. But hopefully it can retain some of the elements that is the root,
Right.
where it came from, and then expand
for those that are interested to go digging, are only going to find a deeper appreciation for, like with me with the Gauro, I'm like, that's cool. And what started as just a silly story about some guys punking a neighborhood to get their money about some fake beast they caught. Then it's like, oh wait, no, there's actually some stories about this, like some family went missing, and there might have been like this beast in the woods. Of what if that might be connected to some Native American culture with this horned serpent creature? And then what culture did that come from? Like when you run it back up the riverbed, so to say, you only gain a deeper appreciation for the story. And then as I tell it to my kids at bedtime, I'm adding in some silly stuff to them right now too.
Yeah,
So it's fun.
Yeah, I think that's the richness of the story.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think storytelling is not what it once was, because society doesn't take the time to sit down and hear the storyteller tell the story, right? And today it's all social media and Instagram, and everything is, these, 10-second hits, 15-second hits, and we're busy, right? But I think for those, like you said, that take the time to look for it and seek it out and take a moment to listen, that's where the richness comes from our Ozark culture.
For sure. Yeah. The storytelling it's just adapted. It's changed. I think it's still very much there. It just looks very, very different. A lot of time, we participate in storytelling on a podcast. Like, podcasts didn't used to exist, but very much alive in the podcast world. And there's lots of podcasts out there now that tell stories, and there are YouTube videos, and there's, social media posts and reels and all kinds of stuff. So it's changed and it looks different. But I think storytelling is kind of a essential part of being a human.
Yep.
It's how we, like, back to your point, it's how we absorb and pass on information that's valuable and important. And if you can tell a story that makes someone feel something and have a connection to it, they'll remember it much more than, just a bullet point on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So I don't think we could ever lose it. Hopefully, that would be my hope, because we see it as valuable. I know that the four of us, 5 of us with Dan over here in the corner, see it as valuable. So hopefully we don't lose it. I'll ask you last question. and I'll give you a chance to tell the story that you came up with on your own. That back to, again, you were raised in this culture, and you came up with this story to tell Connor and I, my brother, that in some way, like, you couldn't help it because this was just a part of who you are. But my question is, will you continue to tell stories to your children? You guys mentioned a little bit of this, but is this important to you enough to where you're going to continue to pass this stuff on to y'all's children? And I'll start with you and give you a chance to say yes and why you did and how you did.
Yeah, so I will continue to tell stories to my children, and my children's children, and that's part of the privilege of being a grandparent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want me to tell this John Rosson story?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So
this was a story you made up on your own.
Totally made it up on my own, and this was in part just for entertainment, and also in part to ensure the safety of my young sons. So I want to say it was about 1998. We have a cabin up on the Mulberry River, 124 acres, beautiful, almost a half-mile of riverfront property, and a 90-acre meadow, and then to the north it goes up the mountain. And so there was the original owner of this property, which was a section, which I think, Kyle, a section 250 acres. Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
Okay. So John Rosson was the original buyer of this piece of property from the Department of the Interior.
Mm-hmm.
So Arkansas becomes a state in 1836, about 25 years before the Civil War. So at some point thereafter, John Rosson buys this piece of property from the Department of the Interior, the government, and so and I've got the paperwork, and here's his name. So I've got this. He and his wife are buried on top of this bridge, and there's these old hand-chiseled graves, and here's John Rosson's grave. What's interesting is his wife, Sarah, the tombstone says, "Here lies the wife of John Rosson," and then in small print, Sarah. You know? So it's like, Connor and Kyle have...
School.
Yeah, old school. So Connor and Kyle have grown up, so they know the name John Rosson. And so there's Rosson's Holler, and there's Milton's Ford. If you're familiar with the Mulberry River, Milton's Ford is a shallow that you can cross when the water's down. So that was on our property. But Rosson's Holler was this really beautiful holler going up the hill. Well, one day we were out in the meadow, about a 90-acre meadow on the four-wheeler, and so a fog is coming off the river and it's kind of creeping across the meadow. At the same time, there's a fog coming off the mountain coming across, and they're going to converge out there. And this fog is about 2.5 feet from the grass, so you can kind of look under it. And I come up with this story. I said, "Boys, I want to tell you about John Rosson. John Rosson's ghost will walk in the fog of the Ozarks." And I said, "You never want to be out in the middle of this meadow when the fog is coming from the river and the mountain, because that's where John Rosson will be. And you can look under and you can see him coming. He's 6'6". He wears tall black leather boots. He wears a black coat that's long. He's got a white hair and white beard, and he'll come for you. Don't be caught out here in this fog. And if the fog ever gets all the way around you, you're not going to be able to get out." So that was a fun story. My intention was safety. These boys don't need to be out in the fog. That meadow also had some sinkholes in it that one time swallowed a Toyota Land Cruiser we were in.
We were in that truck.
That was frightening. So I tell this story. They've got this in their mind. They know he's buried on the hill. They know he owned the property. Dad's telling the truth, and they're certain of it. Of course, later that night, as I've planted this a little bit scary seed. I tell the boys, I said, and it's foggy tonight, and I tell the boys, I'm going to go outside and go to the bathroom. I'll be back in a little bit. And of course, I go out. No, I stay a half hour. I stay too long for a guy that just went out to the bathroom. I'm watching through the windows, and those little imaginations, and the fire's cracking in the fireplace. Man, it was a beautiful story. So when Kyle called me to tell this, to talk about this tonight, I called Connor out in Tucson, Arizona. I said, "Hey, tell me."
My brother.
Yeah, Kyle's brother. I said, "Hey, tell me what you remember about the John Rosson story." Man, he told me it verbatim everything I just
Details.
told you guys.
That's awesome.
It's so good.
So it's planted. There's
Yeah.
on to the next generation.
And that's, for me, that was all I needed to know to never go out into the meadow and never got lost in the fog. So it was effective in doing exactly what you wanted it to do.
And if old Randolph would have showed up to interview you about stories, you would have told it.
I would have told him that story.
And it would have been carried on of like,
Yeah.
oh,
There you go.
old John Rosson.
That's
Yeah.
Like that happens out there.
That is
Yeah.
right. That is
That's
right.
cool.
So that's a
That
good
was-
story.
That was fun.
And he made it up, and I'm like, that's
I
just
love
his
that.
Ozark storytelling background. Is like you couldn't help it.
That's good.
You guys mentioned that you guys were gonna
Oh yeah, I mean, I
carry some on. Are there
already
some in
tell
your
stories.
family that you'll pass on that you remember hearing growing up or anything like that?
like a real life, like just want them to feel rooted to of old Thaddeus Moore, my namesake. He is my third great grandfather, and just the story of him immigrating to this region, came out of Tennessee. His wife had died of like typhoid. He moves over here, finds a new wife whose husband had also died of typhoid. It's like the detail I remember.
Lots of time.
But then them getting rooted in kind of the Arkansas area, and just my grandpa was a butcher in Charleston, had a meat market there, which is just a neat piece in there. I always think of that whenever I'm harvesting a deer. The first time Kyle actually taught me how to harvest a deer and how to process it, and so. But just thinking through that and like just feeling tied to your history and that, so that'll be fun to share with the boys. And
Yeah.
we have my dad still has some of his old like even butcher his
Oh,
old
that's
butcher
cool.
block and some
Very-
knives,
awesome.
and so it's like that'd be cool to like preserve those and introduce the boys to that. But yeah, I mean even but then like on a silly note, like just I'm telling them making up versions of these stories and
The
these
magic
dumb
rocks
stories
and-
and
yeah.
magic rocks, and we were on a kick even like just over the last week of. I did one story one day. Trying to just get him to be quiet and go to bed. Guess what monster I saw today at my office? Like I was walking out and I saw this, and I'm pulling some of these things, and so now every time at bedtime, Dad, what monster did you see today? And they're just like locked in. They
Yeah,
want to know.
I wanna know.
There's these mythical things out there that they want to know about, and they
Yeah.
can't see, and they wonder if I have pictures. And sometimes I'll just Google like. I was telling some story about like a Bigfoot type thing. I looked up a picture of Chewbacca from Star Wars. They're like, awesome.
This is him. Keep an eye out for this
And
guy.
they're like, our oldest is 4, so like they got there. I'm gonna have to get a lot more creative.
Yeah,
but
you are.
but just things like that are awesome.
That's
Yeah.
cool. That's cool.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned earlier that you'd be worried if the stories go away or storytelling goes away.
Yeah.
I don't think you have anything to worry about with storytelling going
Yeah.
away. That's ever since
they-
humans could make sounds, they've been telling stories.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It seems like a ludicrous idea that
Yeah.
we would lose it.
But I think the types of stories we tell are what I worry about.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I'm absolutely going to tell my kids Ozark stories.
Yeah, for sure.
And I like some of the mystery, some of the
Mhm.
the world is big and the woods are dark kind of stuff. But I'm right now, with my kids trying to tell stories of bravery and heroes and underdogs and all that kind of stuff to even instill in them a sense of kind of a can do, can figure it out, can rise up to the challenge attitude. I told my daughter a bear hunting story for like 6 weeks because she was obsessed with it. She's like, Daddy, tell me the story about when we went bear hunting. This kid's never been bear hunting.
Ever.
She's a toddler.
Yeah.
They're a little, right past a toddler, little girl. But she loved the story that I told every night before bed of how we would get in the truck and we'd have the food and we'd walk in the woods and even everything was a rhythm. So we'd crunch, 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 and the bear would munch, munch, munch. And then we'd get in the tree and then we'd listen for it and it would crunch, 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 and it would munch, 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 and all this stuff. And eventually she gets the bear. Now in this story, because she's very small, she shoots the bear with her pink bow because she added in that detail.
You gotta be pink.
Yeah. And then we catch the bear and we ride it home and it becomes a pet. But it's all about like she's figuring out her world. Like it involves all these things and it involves adventure and like an unknown element and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I'm gonna tell the stories. I also want to make sure that I want to make sure I'm telling the right stories. And that's fun in kind of this stage of life to tell just the ones I grew up on, but also tell the ones that I'm just kind of making up as we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, I appreciate you guys for divulging all of your family stories and everything that you guys shared with us and the research you guys put into this. I think it's hopefully listeners listening they can take from this and realize, like, man, there's a lot of value to storytelling. There's a lot of value in going ahead and trying to remember that story that your dad told you, that your grandpa told you, and then telling it to your kids and to people around you, because that's a part of who we are. And you know, a lot of these ghost stories and the scary, spooky stories, while they're out there and they're wild and they seem crazy and just impossible, there's some purpose behind them potentially, and some of it's just entertainment and it is just completely false and untrue, but some of it's practical skills that have been passed down, some of it's morals and values, and you know, I think that stuff is cool. You know, if nothing else, it's cool, it's interesting, but I do think there's some value in it. So I'm hoping that people are listening right now, and you're thinking and you're realizing there's stories that you've been told your whole life that are unique to you and your family, that you're like, man, I got to share that story. I want to tell people, if you want to share the story, send it to us. I would love to hear some more Ozark stories. And, you know, depending on what we get back and what we read through, I'm sure there's going to be more than a few of you who are like, I've got a Panther story where dad went to town and that panther was climbing on the roof.
Eating the baby.
But send them to us. We want to hear them. We
That's
love connecting with you guys and hearing that stuff. So
Can send that to the ozarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. All right. We appreciate you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure you send it to a buddy and let us know. We will see you on the next one.